Okay, the first thing I want to discuss in this moding section is the difference between what I'm going to call the moding manager versus moding materials. So if you remember back in the section in designing in Cabinet Vision, I showed you the easy way, which I'm referring to as the moding manager. In this video, I'm going to kind of compare that I showed you in that video versus setting up moding as materials. So just to refresh what we covered in that video, I created a material called Cherry Moding, but really it's just a board stock. Then I went to material schedules and I literally just assigned that Cherry Moding across the board. And if I go into a job, and add a cabinet, go to moding and auto build some crown, I get my crown, and finally if I go to reports, I get a moding report which says the profile, what moding it's made out of, and again I'm just generically using Cherry Moding across the board, and that gives me a lineal inches and lineal feet. Now, like I mentioned in that video I did in the other section, this is by far the easiest way to do moding, and I'm going to say the big majority of you probably should do moding this way. However, there are some pros and cons. So the cons are you can't see exactly how many pieces you need. It gives you a lineal footage, but it's really still up to you on knowing, okay, I need a 12-foot piece and 2 little pieces. You know, do I want to do 2 8-footers or do there's still some things that you have to do, which I like to use that moding report, my lineal footage, as a reference. Just kind of look at my job and say, okay, I want 3 8-foot sticks or whatever the case may be. So the difference between this method and what I'm going to call moding materials is moding materials will actually tell you how many sticks you need. So let's close out of this, go back to the main screen, and let's talk about what that looks like. So essentially, if I go to my material library and go to the moding category, like I mentioned, I have just Cherry Moding as a board stock. So in this video, I'm going to show you how we would set it up if we wanted to use the material version of the moding method. So I'm going to click New and add a moding. So I'm just going to call it Moding Material. And now I have to set up, okay, is this going to be a crown? And how long is it going to be? So I'm going to do an 8-foot crown. There we go. And I'm just going to call it Moding Crown Material. Okay, so if I use this option, now I'm managing my profiles from within the materials. And not only that, this is not just my crown, it's also Cherry specific crown. So let me say Cherry crown material 8-foot, and it's not talking about all crowns, it's a specific profile. So I don't know, CCM 450 or whatever style the case is. But you can see how not only most shops have a lot of different modings, a lot of different crowns, maybe even a lot of different lengths, and certainly when you combine that with all the different species, you can see how you're going to have hundreds of materials because every single combination has to have a different material. So if I double click into this, there's a profile option, and I have 2 ways of drawing this crown. I can just edit and use my shape editor like we saw with the doors and the profiles, or if I've already drawn my moding, I can actually import a profile, which means I can pull in one of these stock profiles, a copy of that. And then I would make a copy of this and I would say, okay, this is walnut. And then I'd go change my textures, you know, make it walnut, and then I would copy this and make it maybe poplar. And that's just for one style of crown at 8-foot lengths. Because then I would have to copy my Cherry, and maybe there's a different size of CCM called 350, and you know, then you'd have to go through this. Okay, so that's the first downside, is a lot of materials, a lot of time to set up. Now, obviously the big pro to this method is you can see exactly how many sticks, and for a lot of people that is probably worth quite a bit. So the other downside, other than creating a whole lot of materials, is when we go to create material schedules, here's the part that I really don't like. So now when we assign materials to our moding schedule, I have to try to assume what combinations are going to go together. Because once I start creating specific sets, you know, I'm going to say, okay, with my CCM 450 crown, I'm going to always use this baseboard, which I don't have a baseboard created. But, imagine all the different drop downs you're going to need if you have, say you have 10 different baseboards and 20 crowns. You're not necessarily going to always use the same baseboard with every crown. So are you just going to make a combination and have 400 drop downs here? I think it just goes way too in the weeds. I would rather use this generic cherry molding method. Use the auto build, use the report to get your lineal footage and figure out how many sheets and find a way to drop it in and get reporting off of it. I may be, and I will admit, most of the people I work with do not use this material molding. So maybe I'm a little biased, but I just think there's way too much complexity here for a small payoff. So hopefully this video kind of helps you understand the difference between what I'm calling the molding manager, where everything's managed at the profile library and then I just assign a board stock just to get the texture, versus trying to manage profiles, lengths, and everything else from the material library. In this video, we're going to talk about adding a new molding, and I'm specifically going to be adding a crown molding, but it's going to work the same for all different types of moldings. So from the main screen, I'm going to click on molding, and I'm already in my crown section, which is great, so I'll stay there. And then you can see a lot of the stock profiles that Cabinetvision Vision has, which, just like everything else, once I start adding my own, I'm going to delete their system profiles. So let's say I have a molding supplier. In this case, I just pulled up Osborne's website and found this traditional cabinet crown molding. So one little note that I'm going to insert here, if you can find a molding supplier that just has a plug and play Cabinetvision Vision setup package, that's worth a whole lot. So if you're kind of weighing which supplier to use for molding, if you do outsource it anyways, that should be a pretty heavy consideration, is how easily can I get their profiles into my Cabinetvision Vision. So be sure to ask about. Now, if you're drawing your own moldings, let's say we're using Osborne cabinet crown molding, and they may even have a package for Cabinetvision Vision. I didn't even look. But in this case, I just want to do one molding so you can see that in case you use a supplier without it, you're going to see how to pull it in. Okay, so we have a traditional cabinet crown molding, and notice they give us CAD drawings. There's a DXF and a JPEG, or an image file. So I want to download the DXF, and if I click on the image, it shows me this CAD drawing, which isn't super helpful here. So let's start with the DXF method. So I'm going to go into Cabinetvision Vision, and I'm going to add a new molding. I'll call it Osborne Crown. And there's two ways we can import DXFs. So before I go into the editor, there's the 3D import, and then when I'm inside of the editor, there's the DXF import. So the 3D import is for if you drew it in SketchUp, or it can still be a DXF file, but it means that it has width, height, and depth, like it's actually a 3D model. Now, I'm going to assume that my DXF is not, just based on the file name itself, because it says 2D at the end. So that means I would not use the 3D import. I would go into the editor, I would delete the existing ones, and go to DXF insert. It asks me where my file is. I'll choose that, and it feels like you should just see a preview, but you actually have to hit import first. And then here's the annoying thing about a lot of CAD files. They come with all these extra layers and title blocks. And if the person set their layers up nice, you can turn this off and just pull in your molding, which is super helpful, but I don't know why. It seems like it's never set up quite how you want to import it, but technically it's okay. So if you have AutoCAD or QCAD or some quick way to edit a DXF, you could open it there and trim this stuff out. But technically it's not too hard to delete out of here either. So let's just import all the layers and click OK. And then see how it's going to just load this huge image. I'm just going to place it right there. And I want to delete everything that I don't need. So everything except this little profile down here. So I'm just going to kind of draw a box around the things that I don't want. And then we'll zoom in. And at this point, I like to hit check. It would give me an error and show in red if there was extra lines that I happened to miss. But you can see these turn green, and I didn't get any errors saying too many shapes. So we're good. So the final step is to put a reference point. And think about the reference as, if you type in, I want my crown at an elevation of 84 inches, for example, the reference point tells you where that starts. And so for most crown moldings, I want it just at the bottom inside corner. It also affects where it's applied to the cabinet as well. So, if you're putting like an AO trim on top of a frameless cabinet, put the reference point 7/8 inch back from the front so it overhangs. So there is a couple times when the reference point is not right in the corner, but most times it's going to be just right in the corner so that it can, the elevation and the end out is right in the corner. Okay, so if I hit return, now if I go to 3D mode, we can see we have a nice looking profile. So that was pretty easy, right? Now, obviously there's hundreds of modings, but at least we have a workable DXF. It's not always that nice, because sometimes you'll find that either there's too many layers where you can't get it cleaned up, or the actual points in the profile are just incorrect, or there's too many, or just, something just might not be working right. Now, if your supplier doesn't have a DXF, the only thing you can really do is, so they have this image file, which is horrible quality. So I think I'll actually just use the product image rather than their little downloadable image. I'll just get my little Snagit screenshot tool, and I'll just take a picture of this. And this is a similar thing that I did for the door profiles. Okay, now I'll go back into Counter Vision, and let's just create a new molding. Call this Osborne 2, and we'll edit and just delete the box. And this time I'm going to insert an image. Okay, and then we'll just kind of put this aside. And so first thing I want to do is I want to draw a box that's 3 1/8 by 4 inches, because that's the overall shape of my box. So I'm going to do 4 inches. Make sure you turn the snap to points on. And do 3 1/8 over, 4 inches, 4 inches. Now I want to get this box to fit inside of here. So this is kind of the tricky part, and this is where it's not as accurate as the DXF. So DXF is certainly the preferred method, but I want to show you this because sometimes your suppliers are just going to give you a PDF file and you're not really going to have anything to work with. Now, looking back, this is a little bit hard to get lined up because my image is so far from the edge. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to delete this, and I'm going to go back to my File Explorer, and I'm going to right click on this and go to Open with Paint. And let's just drag this a little closer to the edge. It'll make it a little easier to get this thing to the right proportions. Okay, now I just hit Control S to save that. And let's insert that again. So now I want to move this something like that, and then make sure you grab the corner, and we'll downsize. Okay, so again, there's a little bit of tolerance here. We'll be off a 64th or a 32nd real easily. But now it's just a matter of starting to trace the lines. And so, I might just kind of lay a line in here like this, and then I gotta make all these different offsets. So I might use my offset tool and kind of just put markers where I'm gonna need lines. And you can see we got kind of this double edge shape here, so I'll try to just kind of guess where these two lines intersect, and then I'll just keep adding offsets to get me intersections where I need them. And again, just trying to guess where that intersection is on that second arc that comes through there. And then I'll put some lines in here. Just kind of snap them in place, and then we'll use our bend tool to make them fit. Okay, so this one looks like there's a little more flat area than I like. So I'm actually going to move this up just a little bit and then draw another line down there so that way that stays flat. Now I can bend that a little sharper without, you don't want it to extend past on your arc. Okay, so you can see there's obviously, and I didn't even start my image quite perfectly, which obviously I could have done a little better job of that, but you can see that, it's not too terribly hard to replicate a profile just based off of the image. Now if I hit check, I have way too many shapes, so I need to get my trim delete tool out and just start clicking on these things. Now, it looks like my image is kind of causing problems, so I should maybe just get my image out of there. Just kind of set it off to the side, and then go trim delete. Then you can just click on the lines one by one, and notice how it only deletes toward the intersection. So that's the difference between trim delete and the select tool. because the select tool will select the entire line all the way across, which I don't want to delete. So that's why we're using trim delete, so it only does the intersections. Start working on the internal parts. And we want to leave ourselves with just the perimeter of this shape. And arcs can be really frustrating. And you can see I just deleted my arc there. The trim delete doesn't always work flawlessly, but I'm going to just keep moving and then I'll pull my image back in to fix that then. Okay, so let's draw a line back there. And then we'll trim this out. And now I want to set my image back in here so I can see where this thing belongs. And then we'll just kind of bend this guy back in shape. So now I can get rid of my image. And now you'll notice that, well, this is backwards. So it's kind of like the same thing we had with our door profile. The image just happened to be opposite of how my crown needed to be. And so what I mean by that is, if I save this, look at all my other crown moldings. They're going the other way. And so mine is backwards. And so if I'd try to use this on a job, it would be facing back toward the cabinet instead of outward. So we go back into edit, and 75–80% of the time, this transform button will work. And it looks like it mostly worked. For whatever reason, it got rid of my arc. So once again, I will get my bend tool and kind of just make that look back to how it should. And then now it's facing the correct way. So again, just like I mentioned, whoops, looks like we still got a little issue here because it says shape is not closed. And you can see there's an extra line here. So let's trim delete that. That can be so frustrating. So you can see the mirror tool itself is a little unpredictable. There we go. Now I can put my line back in. And realistically, I should import my image again and, you know, make it look right. But for the sake of this video, I'm just going to put that in there. And now my reference point is right in the corner, and now my crown is facing the correct way. Now, to avoid that last hassle with the whole mirror situation, just like I did with the door profile, what would be better is if I would open with Paint, and before I started importing, if I would just flip this thing horizontal, I could have drew it perfectly. So, you might be thinking, wow, I'm never going to get 100 profiles in here. And so, again, that's why I stress the importance of find a supplier that can give you nice workable DXFs. Like, it's not hard to trace the image like I just did, but it's time consuming, and, you know, there's definitely some inaccuracies when you trace it over the image itself, especially like a lower quality image like this. So if you are outsourcing, make that an important part of who you outsource to, is how well they can give you information for cabinet vision. And the other thing is, if you are making your own crown molding, you can actually, a lot of times, contact your tooling suppliers and get them to send you DXFs to help you get some nice starting points that are perfectly accurate. So that's how we draw a crown molding, or any molding for that matter. Like I said, it's going to be the same exact process, whether it's a baseboard or a casing, whatever it is. The only difference we have to think about is where should the reference point be. Sometimes we need to merge multiple moldings together so that we can save time drawing that on the job. So one example of this is doing a two-piece crown, or a crown with riser, or crown with L trim, whatever you want to call it. Just for reference, in Google Images, there's this image where we have the crown molding, and then we have this little L-shaped trim or riser behind it. So that's what we want to do with our first molding set. There's other examples of times when you might want a molding set, but that's going to be the main one, is this crown with the riser. So I'm going to use this Osborne crown that we imported in the last video. And I don't really have a good riser molding. Yes, I do. It comes stock with cabinet vision. I'm going to just use this right here. So this is just going to act as my little L trim. So how do I merge these together? Well, in theory, I could just edit and, you know, kind of draw this L trim around here and put my reference point where I need to, and that would be acceptable as well. But there's a special feature built into our molding editor where if I go new, I can do a molding set. So I'm just going to say Osborne, I'll just call it set. And I'm going to go to edit. And this time in the edit tool, there's not any CAD tools. I can't draw lines and things. All I can do is insert different profiles. So let's put the sub crown in. Just kind of pull it out there. And I'm going to get this in position, and then I'll pull in the crown. So I'm going to use my X and Y coordinates to make this perfectly 0, 0. And you'll notice when I make it 0, 0, it's still sticking out. And that is because If I go look at my subcrown and go to edit, you see where the reference point is? So that's why when it's 0, 0, it's sticking out. And so a lot of people will put their reference point on like a subcrown or something at 7/8. That way it sticks out past the face of the cabinet 7/8, and I can still draw my line right on the cabinet. Okay, if I go back into my Osborne set, I have this in the correct position. Now I'm ready to insert my crown. So let's just do Osborne crown. And I'll get my select tool. And let's just 0 this out so we have a good starting point. And now I don't know what their reference point is. Let's try 3/4. No, looks like it is 7/8. Okay, so there my crown is perfectly out flush with the front of the riser. And then now I can just decide whatever reveal I want. So, if I want 1.5" reveal or whatever. The thing that I don't love about this is sometimes every job has a different reveal. And so there's no good way to control this at the room level or cabinet level or whatever you want to call it. Really, all you can do is say, Osborne set for a certain profile, 1 and 1/2 reveal. And so if the next job needed a 1" reveal, really you just have to come back in here and copy it and make a 1" reveal. So I don't love that, but you can see it is pretty easy to pull these in and manage it. Because, if I just hit copy and say 1" reveal, and I would just edit this, click on my crown and put this at 1". Pretty quick and easy to do. So there we have that. I'm not sure what's going on with my shape. Did it maybe looks like it pulled in 2 of these when I copied it. So we have 1" reveal, and if I go back to this one, we have 1.5". Now let's go into a job and see how those work. So in my molding, I'm going to go to crown. I still have the crown material selected, so notice profile is no longer available. That's annoying. Let's go fix that. We don't want to use the molding material, so I'm going to put that back how I had it, and then start a new job. And now if I go to crown, I can select my crown set just like I can any other molding. So why don't we start with selecting our regular Osborne crown. And let's just put 1 wall cabinet and do an auto build. Okay, so that's nice. Because my origin point is at the bottom, it sets right on top of the cabinet and it's just sticking out the thickness of the molding. So that's perfect. If I put it in wireframe mode, you could see that the molding is starting perfectly on top of there. Now, let's go into room and switch to our crown set with 1" reveal. Now I automatically get that 7/8 overhang and then my 1" reveal. And so very quickly we can make these nice big crown sets that come out flush with the doors. Now you're probably looking at this and thinking, well, I don't really want it to stick out 7/8 on the ends, which is a valid question. So you have 2 options. You either put your reference point flush or you go into molding and you always pull this in. Say you wanted to overlay an 1/8, I'd move this in 3/4 and move this in 3/4. So if you want your ends and your face to be a different point, you're going to have to edit one or the other. So it's up to you whether you want to put your reference point so it comes out flush with the doors, or you put your reference point so it comes out right with the sides. But there might be some manual manipulation depending on how you use your molding risers.